Hey everyone, today we're going to be looking at 5 of the most twisted family massacre cases you've ever heard. They say a child cannot choose their father, but a mother definitely can. In this case, that choice made all the difference. Jesse McFadden, a convicted rapist with a long history of sexual crimes, was given the chance to become a father figure to 3 teenagers. However, on the day he was supposed to appear in court, he didn't show up. Instead, the police discovered 7 bodies at his home. All were shot in the head, and 2 of them had been sexually assaulted. The big question is, how could this tragedy have happened? You'll decide for yourself by the end of this video. And brace yourself, because this is a case you won't forget. To start with, this happened about a year ago in Henrietta, Oklahoma, and it all began with Holly McFadden. She was a stunning 35-year-old mother of 3 teenagers, and she had 2 daughters, Tiffany Guess, who was just 13, and Riley Allen, 17. She also had a son, Michael Mayo, who was 15. The children had different biological fathers, but they all called Tiffany's father Joe, their dad. Joe wasn't just a figure in their lives, he was their rock. He and Holly had been married for 13 years before their divorce, and he'd been a constant in Riley's life since she was only a year old. Even after the marriage ended, Joe's love for the children never wavered. He cared for them like they were his own. He even wanted to adopt Michael and Riley. But then, everything changed. On May 26, 2022, Holly remarried. She tied the knot with a man named Jesse McFadden, and this, tragically, is where their story took a dark and unexpected turn. From the outside, their life looked like a fairy tale, a happy marriage and a blended family getting along perfectly. But no one was ready for the horrifying truth about Jesse that would come to light just a year after they married. At this point, it's unclear whether Holly knew about his past before their marriage. What we do know is that her mother found out about Jesse's troubling history months before the tragedy. We'll dive into those details soon. As for Jesse McFadden, he was born in Kansas and dropped out of school after 9th grade. He was living in McAlester when he first ran into legal trouble for underage beer possession. In 2002, he admitted to stealing over $80,000 from his grandfather and pleaded guilty to a felony charge of grand larceny. The following year, he was caught twice for driving with a suspended license. And in that same year, Jesse was charged and arrested for attacking a 17-year-old girl at knife point with very sexual motives. He was convicted of this crime and sentenced to 20 years in prison. And while in prison, Jesse got caught with a cell phone for the first time in 2013. A woman had reported that he'd been texting her with sexual messages for 3 months. In 2016, Jesse was caught with a cell phone again. When officers confiscated the phone, they discovered explicit conversations, videos, and photos involving a 16-year-old girl named Caitlin. It was Caitlin's grandfather who had reported their interactions to prison officials. According to an affidavit from a Department of Corrections investigator, Jesse was accused of sending graphic content to Caitlin and engaging in manipulative behavior. Despite being required to serve 85% of his sentence, Jesse's time in prison was marked by outstanding evaluations for work and education, which initially made him eligible for early release. However, his contraband cell phone incident led to a temporary loss of this privilege before he was eventually released in October 2020. Now, the question is, how did someone with such a messed up past get early release when they were caught doing the same things that put them in prison in the first place? It's baffling why he wasn't kept in jail until his trial, especially since getting caught with that cell phone should have stopped him from getting out early. Not stopping there, after his release, Jesse was supposed to check in with the sheriff's office every 90 days, but he didn't stick to the rules. Normally, people like him aren't allowed near places where kids hang out, like schools and sports events. But he completely ignored those rules. Now, remember when we mentioned earlier that Jesse was accused again after sexting with Caitlin? Well, the trial for that case was delayed by several years. It was because of this delay that Jesse got married and even had the opportunity to work and act as a stepfather to Holly's 3 children. It wasn't until May 1st, 2023, that the trial would finally begin. Jesse planned to argue in court that he was only communicating with a 20-year-old friend of the 16-year-old girl, not the girl herself. Initially, Joe and Holly had a strict rule. Anyone around their kids had to pass a background check. Holly assured Joe that Jesse's check was clear before the trial on May 1st. Now, it's a mystery whether Holly didn't notice his shady behavior or simply chose to ignore it. What really happened is anyone's guess. Meanwhile, while they waited for the trial, a series of deadly events unfolded. In the final weekend of April 2023, Ivy Webster and Brittany Brewer, along with a few other girls who chose not to join, were invited to spend time at Tiffany's house, where Jesse McFadden was also staying. The weekend was meant for fun and typical teenage activities. On Saturday around noon, Jesse McFadden picked up Brittany. The plan was to take the girls shopping at the mall and then to Main Event, a popular family entertainment center in Tulsa. Ivy kept her mom, Ashley Webster, updated through Snapchat throughout the night. But the next morning, something was off. Ivy and Brittany's parents received texts from their daughters saying they were heading to McFadden's family property in McAllister, and by Monday, the situation grew even more concerning. None of the kids, Brittany, Ivy, Tiffany, Michael, or Riley, were on the school bus in the morning, which drove right past their homes. Worried and alarmed, the parents reported the kids as missing to the police. Meanwhile, Jesse McFadden was supposed to appear in court that same Monday for his trial, but he never showed up. Officers stood outside his property, waiting for a warrant. When they finally obtained one, they were unprepared for the horrifying discovery they would find. 7 bodies were discovered scattered across Jesse McFadden's property. The initial shock of finding Jesse himself among the dead was just the beginning. As authorities began piecing together the identities of the victims, it became clear that the other 6 were just as tragic. Jesse's wife Holly, her 3 children, Tiffany, Michael, and Riley, and Ivy and Brittany, 2 close friends of the family. All 7 had been brutally shot in the head with a 9mm pistol, a grim detail that painted a picture of cold-blooded violence.
Holly McFadden suffered 3 gunshot wounds to the head, and Jesse McFadden appears to have shot himself in the head.
The bodies were spread out in 2 separate locations on the sprawling land. Ivy, Brittany, and Riley were found about a quarter mile from the house, while the other 4 victims were discovered in a dense, wooded area. The separation of the bodies suggested a sinister scenario. They might have been killed in different spots and then moved, or they could have been fleeing from their killer. And it didn't take long for investigators to uncover the tragic truth. Jesse had first used the gun on his wife, her children, and their friends, before finally taking his own life. The motive behind these horrific killings remains a mystery, but there are unsettling clues. As we mentioned earlier, Jesse was supposed to start his trial on the very morning the bodies were discovered. It's chilling to think that he might have committed these crimes to keep his dark secrets buried and prevent his family from learning the horrifying details of his actions. The night before the trial, text messages revealed just how disturbed Jesse's mind really was. Caitlin shared that she received unsettling messages from him the evening before the trial. As she was preparing for her important day in court in Oklahoma, she noticed a Facebook message request from Jesse McFadden around 8 p.m. In those messages, Jesse seemed to blame her for not dropping the charges, expressing frustration that his life was falling apart because of her. He wrote, "I did exactly what I promised I would do when I got out. I got a marketing job, made great money, and was advancing. I've been here 2 years now, built a great life like I promised with you. This is all on you for continuing this." In another message, he added, "Now it's all gone. I told you I wouldn't go back." These messages reveal a man desperate to avoid returning to prison and angry that his secrets were about to be exposed. At first, Caitlin assumed McFadden might be blaming her for some personal setback. Maybe he had lost a job. The message also hinted that McFadden no longer cared about the conditions of his bail, as contacting her was a clear violation of the rules. Not wanting to get involved, Caitlin chose to ignore the message. Instead, she took a screenshot and sent it to Edwards, the Muskogee County District Attorney, as a precaution. The next morning, Caitlin received a call from the prosecutor with some unsettling news. The trial had been delayed again because McFadden's lawyer had requested more time due to an issue with McFadden's phone. Then, just half an hour later, Caitlin got another urgent call from the prosecutor. She was informed that there was a missing persons report involving McFadden, Brittany Brewer, and Ivy Webster. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Caitlin packed a bag in a hurry and rented an Airbnb just 45 minutes away, thinking he would come for her. Crystal Smith, one of Jesse's earlier victims, also spoke out about her traumatic experience and the anguish of learning about the killings. She had pleaded with the district attorney not to release Jesse, fearing he would harm others. Crystal shared that the last time she heard from anyone about Jesse was when she was 17. She was told that he was high on meth and sorry for his actions. Despite her attempts to move on, hearing about the tragedy brought back gut-wrenching feelings. In her interview, Crystal revealed the terror she faced when she was attacked by Jesse at 16. She had been at a party in McAllister and left her truck behind. Jesse showed up at her home, claiming that his wife had kicked him out and he needed a place to stay. Despite her attempts to send him away, Jesse forced his way in, gagged her with a sock, tied her to her bed, and subjected her to horrific abuse. In the days following the discovery of the bodies, Caitlin Babb has been overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. She's felt a crushing mix of guilt, anger, frustration, and deep grief.
I feel horrible. It makes you feel terrible, like you're not even human.
Babb says her case was set to start trial on Monday.
I was prepared and I was ready. I've been ready for 6 years.
But McFadden was a no-show and the gruesome news broke.
It was terrible. Especially when it's something that could have been prevented and it never should have happened.
When it came to Ivy and Brittany's parents, they were shocked by Jesse's past. They had no idea about his criminal history. They thought the weekend sleepover was just a normal event. Nathan Brewer, Brittany's dad, described Jesse as a nice guy. Ivy's mom, Ashley Webster, said their families had been friends since late 2020 and that she was unaware of Jesse's background. She described Tiffany and Ivy as best friends and mentioned that Tiffany was like another child to their family. Holly's mother, Jeanette Mayo, also expressed her shock. She revealed that her daughter was deceived by Jesse McFadden's charm. Jeanette noticed that Jesse exerted tight control over Holly, dictating where she could go, whom she could see, and even tracking the kids' cell phones when they were out. Jesse was distant and reserved around Jeanette and her husband, which only added to their confusion. They were actually the first to discover Jesse's criminal record because months before the murders, Jeanette's husband was researching a co-worker's criminal history when they stumbled upon Jesse's past. Jeanette and her husband confronted Holly about what they found, and Holly eventually asked Jesse for an explanation. Jesse, with his twisted mind, reportedly hired someone to convince Holly that his previous legal troubles were a misunderstanding and that he had not harmed anyone back in 2003. Despite this, Holly's assurance that Jesse had passed a background check raised significant concerns.
I was probably the most outspoken family member about Jesse being a registered sex offender. And I would say, do this, Jan, say this. And anytime we tried to approach the situation, she was punished. She was shut down. She was constantly on eggshells. She wouldn't be able to talk to her children. So she had to keep a balance. She had to accept things if she wanted to keep an eye on the grandkids and talk to her daughter.
A few days after the tragic murders, the victims' families and a sheriff's investigator were allowed to visit the house where their loved ones spent their final days. What they found inside was shocking. Multiple beds were equipped with restraints and chains locked into place. In the kitchen, an island had a chain and lock attached to it. The house was littered with disturbing items: bondage toys, restraining devices, lubrication bottles, and witchcraft-related books. Drug paraphernalia was scattered throughout, including what appeared to be drugged candy. The investigators collected a trove of evidence from the scene: computers, cell phones, dirty bed sheets, and other disturbing materials. Among the evidence, one of the families discovered their daughter's cell phone, along with several other devices, multiple computers, and 2 laptops. They also uncovered a bloody wet wipe, 5 more phones, and even more disturbing items hidden in the closet.
Cell phones, laptops, sex and bondage devices. In 2 weeks, officials have collected at least 2 hard drives, 9 cell phones, palm and fingerprints from McFadden's truck, and various purchase receipts. The storage unit under McFadden's wife's name has also been searched.
When they called the police to report this, they shockingly told them to leave the property. Then, a notebook came to light, filled with names, including the 6 people Jesse had murdered. Given what was found in that house, many people can't help but wonder if Holly knew about Jesse's twisted actions. The condition of the house was beyond disgusting, a clear sign that something terrible had been happening for a long time. It's shocking how all this evidence was overlooked, possibly due to sheer negligence from law enforcement. Letting the family into the crime scene before it was fully cleared is unbelievable. And that notebook, it's chilling to think Jesse might have done this before, with everything carefully planned. In an emotional interview, Ivy's parents shared their belief that Jesse impersonated their daughter in a text they received on Sunday, after he had already killed her. Ivy's mom, Ashley, shared that she had been texting with Ivy late Saturday night, but the message she received the next morning felt off. The text said Ivy was going to McAllister and would be home later, but now they think Jesse sent that message, and Ivy was likely already gone when it was sent. Ashley described Ivy as a wonderful kid who loved animals, people, and playing softball. Ivy was known for her big heart and the way she cared for everyone around her. But more than anything, Ivy was Ashley's best friend. She was always thoughtful in her texts, messaging before and after most things, and never forgetting to say, "I love you." So, when Ivy texted about going swimming in McAllister and the specific wording she used, it felt different, but Ashley brushed it off, thinking Ivy was just in a rush. Ivy's parents also mentioned that they found Jesse a bit odd, but since Ivy's friends often hung out at his house, they felt it was safe for her to go there too. Additionally, Tiffany often visited their home, even staying over on weekends, and they never noticed anything strange during those times. Jesse had everyone fooled, making them believe he was a great guy, a loving husband, and a caring father figure. Brittany's father, Nathan, fought back tears as he spoke about his daughter, her outgoing personality, and her dreams of becoming a teacher or a vet. Brittany was also selected to be Miss July in a local pageant, part of the Miss National pageant in Tulsa. Both she and her loved ones were excited about it, and her dad is heartbroken that she won't be able to experience that or anything else. Jeanette, who tragically lost 4 family members, spoke out about her daughter and grandchildren. She described Holly as a fantastic mother who was overprotective and loved her children more than anything. As for Jesse, he didn't deserve an easy way out. His actions demanded far more than just a quick end. He needed to face true justice and suffering for what he did. Even those who knew him in prison have come forward, shedding light on just how twisted he was. James Fleming, who shared a cell with McFadden at Joseph Harp Correctional Center in 2015, described him as a very sexual person, noting that their conversations frequently took unsettling and inappropriate turns. He talked about sex all the time, Fleming said. It wasn't just occasionally, it was constant. And I told someone recently, if I hadn't been strong mentally and physically, I believe he would have tried to molest me. Fleming also shared how learning about McFadden's past changed his perception. When you find out something like that, It just shifts everything you think about a person because it's so horrific. He tried to justify his actions, but I knew better. You don't get a 20-year sentence for statutory rape if you're 18 and the girl is 17 and her parents just got upset. It's much worse than that.
Locked up with a dangerous man.
We were cellmates for about 16 months, maybe a little bit longer than that.
While James Fleming was serving time for burglary, he met Jesse McFadden, who we've told you police say killed 5 children, his wife, and himself.
His weird sexual predatorness just like came out of him. Like everything that we talked about it always led to like a sexual comment or innuendo.
And knowing that the two friends were molested before their deaths has left many people questioning how someone like Jesse McFadden could slip through the cracks, despite his past and the red flags. Why were the signs ignored, and how did the system fail so many innocent lives? Even though Jesse McFadden tried to reinvent himself by marrying Holly and playing the role of a good dad for a while, the disturbing items found in their home, like hand restraints, sex toys, and explicit books, were huge warning signs. It's clear that Holly might have been manipulated into thinking all this was normal. So when you meet new people, keep this case in mind. You can't always judge someone instantly, and you never know what secrets they might be hiding. A promise is a promise. These were the chilling words spoken by 27-year-old Daniel Allen after he set fire to the Gossett home with 3 generations of the family inside. The incident occurred on a cold February morning in 2018 and resulted in 4 people losing their lives. What were the reasons behind this senseless act of violence? What was Daniel Allen, who had no apparent relation to any of the victims, doing in the house at the time? Today, we'll be unpacking the mysteries behind this bizarre case. None of the answers will be what you expected. Let's start by taking a look at how Daniel met the Gossett family. Though the perpetrator committed his crimes in County Fermanagh, Northern Ireland, his story begins far away in the English Midlands. The young Allen had a difficult childhood, with parents that fought practically every day and eventually separated. This didn't make Allen's life much easier, though. Following the split, his mother got together with a string of new partners, some of whom allegedly abused Allen multiple times. This led to the child running away from home at just 12 years old, attempting to move in with his grandparents in Bristol. The attempt failed, and Allen was sent back to an unhappy home where he always felt out of place, and his safety was frequently compromised. He felt a deep sense of isolation from the world around him, and in place of real human connections, he ventured deep into the internet to create a virtual life. From the beginning, there were signs that Allen was a deeply troubled individual. He was a compulsive liar and highly abusive to those around him. On one occasion, allegedly sexually assaulting a woman he was romantically involved with in 2015. The accusation had a disastrous effect on Allen's psyche. He believed himself to be innocent, and the perceived slight on his character led to his violent impulses coming out like never before. Rather than trying to deal with the situation calmly and maturely, Allen took the questionable path of threatening the accuser's life. This obviously didn't sit well with the authorities, who arrested and charged him with intent to physically harm someone. Based on the evidence, Allen was found guilty and sentenced to 4 months in an Ipswich prison. However, Allen wasn't going to give up his freedom so easily. Instead of surrendering to his fate, doing his time and cleaning up his act, Allen decided it was time to leave the Midlands. It's at this point that we must discuss another event that had occurred in his life around this time. Facing enormous difficulties with real-life human connections and showing a clear preference for unorthodox sexual practices, Allen often turned to BDSM chat rooms in his spare time. In one of these chat rooms, he met a woman named Denise Gossett. The pair hit it off immediately, so much so that they decided to move in together. The timing of this chance encounter happened to coincide with Allen's court case. Facing a stint in prison, the culprit decided to run away, leading to the court to issue a bench warrant for his arrest. Where did Allen go? As it turns out, he had a family waiting for him, a family that would soon meet their end at the hands of this strange man. Despite the sensational nature of this case, not much is known about the Gossetts. That's thanks in large part to their itinerant lifestyle, with Denise and her children rarely settling down in one place for very long, living everywhere from Doncaster to South Yorkshire to Tralee, County Kerry in Southern Ireland. The Gossetts themselves claimed at one point that they were trying to escape an abuser by moving around so much. However, some evidence procured after their lives were lost suggested that it was actually an attempt to avoid baby Morgana getting taken away by social services. All we know about the child is that she was born to Sabrina Gossett when she was around 18 years old. The baby's last name, Quinn, likely comes from her father, but no further details have come to light. In 2016, after Denise met Alan in a chat room, she decided to allow him to move in with them. This proved to be a fatal mistake, but it brought a lot of grief to the family long before he took their lives. After Alan moved in with them while they lived in Scotland, the family continued their nomadic lifestyle. Alan became the head of the household, exercising unchecked authority over his 45-year-old partner and her children. He eventually took them to what would be their final resting place, the village of Darylin in County Fermanagh. The rustic settlement had a population of just a few hundred people, making it the perfect place for Alan to tighten his grip on the helpless family. By the time the family had moved to County Fermanagh, they were completely in Alan's thrall. Neighbors reported that the family seemed extremely antisocial. They rarely ever left their homes, with even grocery delivery drivers leaving their purchases on the porch for them to collect. Most of their neighbors never met them, with the few that did reporting that they tended to behave rather strangely. There seemed to be an air of tension among the family members at all times, a sense that there was a chaotic aspect to their relationships that was barely held in check. The isolation was so pronounced that the two teenagers never even went to school or college. Instead, they spent their time at home, where they had to listen to Alan's every whim. For her part, Denise apparently did very little to help her children live a normal life. She helped take care of baby Morgana, but that didn't seem to give her daughter the chance to find someone to take her away from her toxic existence. What's even more sinister is that the family never even told their neighbors their true names. According to reports, they were living in Darylin under assumed names, with Denise going by Crystal and Roman using the name Edward. The strange thing is, Alan's assumed name turned out to be Samuel Quinn. With so little known about baby Morgana's life, could it be that she got her last name from her grandmother's lover? And if so, does this mean that Alan was somehow involved in the pregnancy? The timeline seems to suggest so, since Morgana was just 1 month old when the family moved to Darylin. Alan had already been with the family for several months by this point, so it's highly possible that he was, in fact, abusing Denise's daughter, Sabrina. This makes the events that unfolded all the more difficult to stomach, but there's another layer to this that we've yet to discuss. You see, Alan's addiction to the digital world didn't end after he got together with Denise. The desire to forge sexual connections online was like an itch that Alan couldn't scratch. There's no evidence to suggest that he continued to frequent BDSM chat rooms, but the investigation revealed that he was an avid player of the online multiplayer game, World of Warcraft. This was where he met an unnamed American woman in 2017, a few months after the family had moved to Darylin. In his conversations with this woman, Alan claimed that his relationship with Denise was falling apart. He constantly complained about how unhappy he was and how desperately he wanted to start fresh once again. In December of 2017, his chat records show him asking the woman if she can help him move to America. Perhaps it was the allure of moving to a different country, where British police were less likely to find him, or perhaps he was just the sort of man that wasn't happy with just one partner. Based on the history of his sexual preferences, coupled with his abusive, violent tendencies, It seems inevitable that Alan would tire of the gossips sooner or later. If he were a different man, he might have decided to just abandon the family. As we'll soon reveal, the path he took was considerably more violent and would wipe 3 generations of the gossips from the face of the earth. In the early hours of February 27, 2018, the residents of Darylin awoke to see a column of smoke rising from the Gossett residence. Police were called as the neighbors and the Gossett's landlord, Tommy, rushed to help the mysterious family, where they encountered Alan standing in front of the locked front door. He was desperately waving the would-be rescuers off, forbidding them from going inside. Nothing seemed to move him from his vigil, even the burning roofing tiles falling on his head. When asked if there was anyone inside, Alan repeated the phrase, "Gone. They're all gone." Police soon arrived and managed to pull Alan away from the burning bungalow, but they were unable to get an answer out of him regarding the house's occupants. He just kept repeating the sinister refrain, "Gone, gone, gone, they're all gone." Police then tried asking Alan why these mysterious people he was referring to were gone, and why he seemed determined not to let anyone help them. His answer? A promise is a promise. As for what that promise was, Alan claimed that the family asked him to send them to the next life, since they didn't want to stay in this world anymore. Though the officers couldn't piece together what exactly had happened, they were sure about one thing. Alan was responsible. Judge Nigel Broderick, who presided over the first hearing, seemed to agree, remanding Alan into custody at Magaberry Prison, but things weren't going to go as planned. In most cases, the evidence found inside would have been enough for a short, simple trial. But this wasn't like most cases, because Alan made a bizarre claim as the police took him away. He told them that he was a paranoid schizophrenic, presenting himself as a man that simply had no control over his actions. These claims would end up turning an open and shut case into a 6-year odyssey for justice. The Gossets that lived in Darylin were gone, but Denise had another daughter named Samantha, who lived a fairly normal life elsewhere in the UK. Once the identities of the victims became known, Samantha was informed and she rushed to Northern Ireland to process the horrific loss. During this time, the police conducted their investigation, starting by finally entering the home and encountering the gruesome scene within. All 4 victims were charred beyond recognition, with police having to use dental records to find out who they were. Strangely, Denise appeared to be handcuffed to the bed, while Sabrina and Roman were left to wander as their house burned down around them. Details regarding baby Morgana's body were mercifully left out of the press releases, though chances are that the sight of it left the investigators with deep mental scars. As for Alan, police found a significant amount of blood on his body. When they tested the blood, they found that it came from Sabrina and Denise, indicating that he'd attacked them before setting fire to the house. Alan was questioned about his actions leading up to the police's arrival, and he admitted that he'd strangled Sabrina to death. However, when a medical examiner conducted an autopsy, he found this to be false. To this day, no one knows exactly how Sabrina died, but the ME was able to ascertain how Roman and baby Morgana lost their lives. According to the toxicology report, Alan had pumped them with a lethal dose of GHB, a narcotic substance frequently used to render victims unconscious prior to a sexual assault. Their death at the hands of this substance may have been a mercy, since it helped them escape the torment of being burned alive. However, the same can't be said of Denise, who was forced to watch the flames approach her as she was handcuffed to her own bed, eventually dying of smoke inhalation. Further inquiry was conducted, with police asking Alan to expand a bit on his motive for the act. This was when he made a truly odd claim. According to him, he and Denise had a mutual agreement to end their lives, and the fire was supposedly a part of this agreement. He never mentioned the mystery woman in America, nor did he have an answer for why only his partner lost her life when the pact was supposed to be mutual. While all of this was happening, investigators were compelled to look into his claims of mental illness. As we've said previously, This stalled the court proceedings for 6 years, but examiners ultimately concluded that Allen was fit to stand trial. He'd never been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia before, nor did he show any signs of it during the examination. The assessors did find some indications of a personality disorder, but they concluded that he was fully in control of his actions. Allen might have been trying to create a diminished responsibility defense. His attempt failed, and in February of 2024, the case finally made its way before a judge. Allen pleaded not guilty to the homicides of Roman and Morgana, claiming that they'd already been dead when the fire was set. As for the deaths of Denise and Sabrina, Allen stated that he was guilty of manslaughter rather than homicide. The reason behind this claim was the previously mentioned pact, but the judge, Mr. Justice O'Hara, didn't take kindly to it. When the evidence was presented, the judge admitted to being skeptical of Allen's version of events. Firstly, there's the fact that only Denise died, with Allen staying safe and sound outside the bungalow. Secondly, his conversations with the unnamed American woman provided a possible motive for homicide. Allen watched the lawyers laying out the case with a blank expression, as though he was bored by what was going on. Justice O'Hara heard the facts and concluded that the homicides were premeditated. He commented on the immense cruelty behind these actions and how the intricate planning they required didn't point to a sudden disconnect with reality. Unsurprisingly, given the mountain of evidence against him, Allen was declared guilty on all charges, and on February 21, 2024, he was sentenced to 29 years to life in prison. The earliest he'll be up for parole is 2047, by which point he'll be 56 years old. This was one of the longest sentences ever given in Northern Ireland's recent history, which points to the seriousness of his crimes. However, the sentence incited a public outpouring of dismay and disbelief, with many Darylin residents saying that Allen got off easy. Tommy Fee, the Gossett's landlord, still hasn't stopped thinking about that fateful day, leading to many sleepless nights. Those memories came rushing back when he took the witness stand during the trial, prompting the landlord to have the house demolished so that he and the community could move on. Maureen McGurty, who was one of the first Darylin residents who saw the smoke rising, later stated that the mutual self-slaying pact was utter garbage and that Allen deserved to get the electric chair. Despite the comprehensive investigation that locked up Allen for decades, authorities still haven't put all of the pieces together. Why were the family members using assumed names? Why was Allen really with them? And what of this mysterious American whom he apparently slayed an entire family for? In the end, there's just no way to find out what truly happened because everyone involved is either dead or in prison. Allen has stuck with his version of events so far, so there's no chance of the truth coming from him. Perhaps the best summary of these events came from Samantha, the sole surviving member of the Gossett family, who said, "My beautiful mother was taken from me. My younger brother and sister, Roman and Sabrina, along with Sabrina's wee baby Morgana, are all gone too. Their 4 lives were taken in a fire started deliberately. And it breaks my heart to think on what happened, to think on how they died. I miss them so much. And to be honest, it's very difficult to convey such a loss in words. My remaining family and I are incredibly thankful for everything the police and those who helped bring this to court have done. It is hard to move on with our lives, and my life will never be the same again. But the support of everyone, especially my partner and friends, has truly meant such a lot." The site of the incident now lays barren, with Tommy Fee refusing to rebuild on it out of respect to the victims. It stands as a marker of a truly brutal and especially inexplicable loss of life, with perhaps the biggest tragedy of all being the loss of a 15-month-old's life. What do you think of this case? Do you think Daniel Allen got what he deserved, or do you think he should have received a harsher sentence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A picture-perfect family, the Hart children, Marcus, Hannah, Devontae, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Sierra were all found dead, along with their parents Jennifer and Sarah, after their car plunged off a cliff. But long before it came to this, the children had made desperate pleas for help, cries that went unheard until it was too late.
It was a very confusing scene because there were no skid marks, there were no brake marks.
On March 26, 2018, an SUV was spotted in the Pacific Ocean, 100 feet below a cliff in Northern California. Investigators soon found the bodies of Jennifer and Sarah Hart and 3 of their adopted children, but their other 3 kids were still missing, including 15-year-old Devontae.
Jennifer and Sarah Hart were born just months apart in 1979, and both come from South Dakota. Jennifer had 2 siblings, while Sarah had 3, and they both grew up as the oldest in their families. Sarah was the quiet one, the responsible rule follower who didn't make much noise. Not much is known about her early life, but she was often described as reserved and thoughtful. Jennifer, on the other hand, was the total opposite. She was full of life, always the center of attention, and never afraid to speak her mind. She was confident, funny, and sometimes even a bit abrasive. Jennifer's parents divorced when she was young, and she mostly lived with her mom. But at 14, after a big argument, she moved in with her dad. That didn't last long, though. She was a bit of a rebel and started pushing boundaries. Her dad couldn't handle it, and soon enough, she was sent back to live with her mom. That was just the way Jennifer's life was, full of energy and not afraid to challenge the rules. Fast forward to 2002, Sarah and Jennifer started dating in college while attending Northern State University. Both wanted to be educators. Sarah focused on special education, and Jennifer aimed to be a teacher as well. But, true to their contrasting personalities, Sarah stayed the course, graduated, while Jennifer ended up dropping out. In 2004, they moved to Minnesota, and they had already started their journey into parenthood. By 2005, Sarah had changed her last name to Hart. They both found work in retail, but they were still hiding their relationship from those around them. To family and friends, they were just best friends and roommates. They took in their first foster child, a 15-year-old girl named Lee. Lee, who is now in her 20s, has shared her story about what happened back in 2004. Friends of Jennifer and Sarah came forward later, saying that Jennifer claimed the 15-year-old Lee was eating out of the trash. One day, when they were taking Lee to her therapy appointment, the Hart women drove up, got her out of the car, and watched as she went into the building. Then, they simply drove away and never came back. Lee later said that she had no idea this was happening until her therapist told her she wouldn't be returning to Jennifer and Sarah's home. Instead, she was going to a new foster home. When she arrived at her new foster parents' house, all her stuff was already there, which made it clear that Jennifer and Sarah had planned to leave her behind all along. Lee had believed she would stay with them until she was 18. She also insisted she never ate out of the trash, and even if she did, it wouldn't justify what happened next. It was also reported that Jennifer and Sarah Hart claimed Lee was suicidal, and they didn't want that kind of negative energy around their adopted children. Not long after abandoning Lee, in 2006, Jennifer and Sarah took in 3 siblings through the Texas foster care system. The siblings were 8-year-old Marcus, 4-year-old Hannah, and 2-year-old Abigail. Sarah continued working as the manager of a department store called Herberger's, while Jennifer stayed home with the kids. Friends and relatives noticed some odd signs when they visited. The children never spoke. One relative described Jennifer as extremely strict, saying if the kids did anything she thought was wrong, she would snap her fingers and say, "Get in the corner, no food for you." The same relative noted that anyone who questioned Jennifer's parenting was cut off from the family. "Jen wouldn't have anything to do with you if you disagreed with her," they said. In June of 2008, the next 3 children, 5-year-old Devontae, 4-year-old Jeremiah, and 3-year-old Sierra, were adopted. Tragically, it only took one small mistake to forever change the lives of these 3 children. But first, let's go back to the other kids. In 2008, A teacher noticed bruises on Hannah's left arm and questioned her about them. Hannah said that Jennifer had hit her with a belt. Within months of this incident, all the children were withdrawn from school. For the rest of the year, no charges were ever filed regarding the abuse. In 2009, Sarah, Jennifer, and all the children traveled to Connecticut, where the couple officially married in March. That same year, the Harts sent an email to family members announcing their plans to expand their family even further. Sarah was attempting to get pregnant, and in the email, Jennifer wrote, "After 10 years of talking about this, we have decided on a donor. This month will be the first time she will have done the actual procedure. It's kind of nerve-wracking." But in July, Jennifer sent another email claiming that the baby didn't make it. This raises the question, how could a young couple manage to raise 6 kids and pay for in vitro fertilization on a single salary? It turns out they were receiving between $400 and $500 per month per adopted child, plus Social Security benefits for 2 of the boys. This financial support made up a large portion of their income, which led some to believe it was the motivation behind their adoptions. In 2010, Abigail confided in a teacher that she had owies on her back and stomach. She claimed that Sarah and Jennifer had punished her after finding a penny on her, which they believed she had stolen. As punishment, they reportedly held her head under cold water while hitting her. When the police interviewed the other children, they all described similar patterns of punishment: spankings, being grounded, and having their food taken away. At this point in time, Sarah was the one working outside the home, while Jennifer, who was known for being cheerful but often described as harsh, stayed home with the kids. Jennifer handled the day-to-day tasks, including cleaning the house, taking care of the children, and getting them on and off the bus if they went to school. Many believe that Jennifer was the dominant force in the household, which led people to think that she had Sarah take the fall for incidents involving the children, including one where Abigail claimed that Jen was responsible. Sarah eventually pleaded guilty to assault and was given probation. In 2011, another incident occurred when Hannah told the school nurse that she hadn't eaten all day, which Sarah denied. Not long after this, all the children were withdrawn from public school again and began homeschooling. In 2011, Hannah told the school nurse that she hadn't eaten. This reportedly made Jennifer very angry, who allegedly responded by shoving a banana and peanuts into Hannah's mouth in a fit of anger. When confronted by the police or others about the children's lack of food, Sarah dismissed the concerns, saying, "Oh, they're just playing the food card again. They're always playing the food card." Teachers also noticed that the Hart children were way too thin. When their growth charts were examined, it was discovered that all 6 kids were underweight and shorter than average for their ages. While it's not uncommon for some children to grow at different rates, the fact that all 6 kids who came from different genetic backgrounds were underweight was suspicious. As teachers began reporting concerns to Child Protective Services, the police started to investigate the Hart mothers. But once Sarah completed her year of probation, following a guilty plea to assault charges, the family quickly packed up and moved again. In 2013, they settled in West Lynn, Oregon. In West Lynn, the Harts rented a house with a small farm with goats and chickens. The family became well known in the local community, as they often attended music festivals where the children would dance and spread joy wherever they went. The Hart kids were described as having big smiles, radiant personalities, and an abundance of love, which made them loved by those who met them. Their happiness and loving nature were so infectious that even people who had never wanted children began to reconsider, as they were inspired by how precious and happy these 6 children seemed. But under the mask, the kids were in terrible danger, and no one realized it until it was too late. Now, Jennifer and Sarah would often say that the reason people kept calling CPS on them was because they were a same-sex couple. They believed that people were targeting them for this reason, and that's why they kept moving from state to state. On the surface, some folks might have believed them. They could see how it might look like they were being picked on just because they were different, raising all these adopted kids as a same-sex couple. But when investigators started talking to their friends and family, a different story came out. Those close to the Harts said they were worried about the kids. They described the environment in that home as bad, even controlling. The kids had to raise their hands before they could speak, and they were barely fed. There was this one time when Jennifer ordered a pizza, and each of the 6 kids got just a tiny slice. But when Jennifer found out that the kids had eaten the rest of the pizza overnight, she flipped out. She punished them by not giving them breakfast and made them stay in bed for 5 hours, all because they had eaten more than what she had given them. Friends and family also noticed other strange, strict behaviors, like how the kids always had to walk in single file and how harsh Jennifer could be. When anyone questioned her, saying things like, "Why are the kids being treated so harshly?" or "Why do they have to raise their hands to speak?" it was clear that something wasn't right. Back then, the interviews with the children didn't lead to any concrete evidence of abuse, which left the police unable to determine that the Harts were guilty of any wrongdoing at that time. Meanwhile, Jennifer Hart was creating a Facebook page that portrayed a picture-perfect, happy, and active family. The page was filled with photos and videos of the family at music festivals and on road trips. At that point, it was obvious that Jennifer and Sarah were using the children, especially Devante, to showcase their political opinions that were extremely pro-love and kindness. But while they publicly promoted these values, they were failing to show that same love and kindness to their children behind closed doors. On November 25, 2014, the Harts attended a protest in downtown Portland. The protest was in response to a Missouri grand jury's decision not to indict the police officer who had shot and killed Michael Brown in Ferguson just a few months earlier. During the protest, Devante was holding a sign that read, "Free Hugs," when an officer approached him and asked if he could have one. A freelance photographer captured the moment, and the resulting photo quickly went viral. As the photo quickly went viral, the family began receiving a lot of media interest, with television shows asking for interviews with Devante. But Jennifer refused these opportunities and claimed that she was protecting Devante's privacy. Jennifer later said that the family had received death threats, which led them to move out of the area. But the police never found any evidence to support these claims. It's more likely that the increasing public attention was unwelcome, as the Harts preferred to keep their family life hidden away from the public. In 2017, the family moved to Woodland, Washington, which was about 30 miles north of Portland, Oregon. But this move was different. They settled into a house on a 2-acre lot, with plenty of space and distance from any close neighbors. This isolation gave them even more control over the kids. The closest neighbors were Bruce and Dana DeKalb, who lived in one of the few neighboring houses. The DeKalbs realized that the family rarely came outside, and the curtains were almost always closed. And by March 23, 2017, they had called the police with concerns about the Hart children. The main worry was that the kids weren't being fed properly. They were all small and looked undernourished. For example, one girl who was 12 years old appeared to be about 7. When asked about her missing front teeth, the Hart mothers had a strange explanation. They claimed she didn't want them replaced. The whole situation seemed off, but again, it wasn't enough for authorities to take immediate action.
The one girl who was 12 looked like she was 7. Both of her teeth were missing, front teeth, and we questioned, what's up with the teeth thing? And they said, well, she didn't want them replaced. We thought that was a little weird, but anyway, they were all very small.
Very thin.
Yeah.
Then, in August of 2017, things escalated. Hannah, who was around 15 at the time, made a desperate move. At 1:30 a.m. in the morning, she jumped out of the second-story window of the Hart home. She ran as fast as she could to the DeKalb's residence and started banging on the door, clearly terrified. Bruce and Dana were shocked by her appearance. She was so thin that they mistook her for a much younger child, thinking she was around 6 or 7 years old. Shortly after, Jennifer arrived and took Hannah back home.
1:30 in the morning, the doorbell's ringing, and I answered the door, and then she was standing out there with in a blanket, completely covered in blackberries, because she had gone to that neighbor's house through the blackberries, and then they have a gate that locks that, so she ended up back over on our front doorstep. And at the time, I didn't know what to do, so
What'd she say?
she said that she said that she wanted us to take her to Seattle, and that they weren't treating her right. Don't make her go back.
The following day, the entire Hart family showed up at the DeKalb house to apologize for the incident. Jennifer explained to the DeKalbs that the children sometimes acted out because they were all drug babies, implying that their behavioral issues stemmed from being born to mothers who had used drugs during pregnancy. Hannah later handed the DeKalbs a handwritten note, apologizing for her behavior and claiming that what she had said the previous night was a lie. When Dana DeKalb asked to speak with Hannah alone, Jennifer refused, insisting, "We do everything as a family." At first, the DeKalbs didn't want to get involved, but Dana's father grew increasingly worried about the children. A few days later, he decided to report the incident to 911. The dispatcher asked for more details, and Dana's father described how the girl, who he thought was about 12 or 13 years old, was terrified and begged the DeKalbs not to let her parents know she was there. When Jennifer eventually came to pick up Hannah, she brought all the children with her, and they stood at attention, looking scared to death. Dana's father also told the dispatcher, "I just can't let this go any longer. Those kids, I think, are in very serious danger." His instincts were spot on. He could sense that something was terribly wrong, and he was absolutely right to be worried. He even mentioned to the dispatcher that the children might have been kidnapped. The police, however, claimed there was nothing they could do. A few months later, Devontae started coming over to the DeKalb's house asking for food. Bruce would quietly give him something to eat, and Devontae would beg him not to tell his mothers. Eventually, Devontae returned with a wish list of items, things like peanut butter, fruits, bagels, and cured meats. He asked Bruce to leave the food in a box by a section of the fence so Jennifer and Sarah wouldn't see it.
One of the children came over and started asking for food. And it went on for a period of time until we kind of determined that he was probably reaching out. And we determined that we should call the Child Protective Services, and that's what we did on Friday.
Said he was asking for a lot of
a lot of food. I mean, it started out very,
tortillas and a case of food, multiple cured meats, and non-perishable food items.
Right.
And I was asking that we not tell his mom and to hide it and put it by the fence so he could get to it. That they were withholding food from him as punishment.
Oh, it was Devontae.
Definitely.
You guys have shown us pictures, and we've talked about that one. It was Devontae, because they all came over the next morning with a,
With a story.
a story.
And Devontae told us that they had lied and made us just to make us feel good that everything Hannah told us was true.
After this happened about 10 times, Dana reported it to Child Protective Services. A CPS agent arrived at the Hart's house that same afternoon, but even though they saw the family pull into their driveway in their GMC Yukon, nobody answered the door. The Washington State Department of Social and Health Services reported that they tried to contact the Harts on March 23rd and again on the 26th, 2018. On the 24th, the DeKalbs noticed that the Yukon was no longer in the driveway. After the Harts left their house, there were no more social media updates from Jennifer, who was usually very active online. As they traveled down the Oregon coast into California, Sarah texted her work on the morning of Saturday, the 24th, claiming to be sick, but she didn't show up for work on the 25th or the 26th. One of Sarah's co-workers, concerned that she hadn't shown up for work in 3 days, called for a welfare check on the 26th of March. The co-worker explained to the dispatcher that Sarah had texted around 3 in the morning on Saturday saying she was sick, but no one had been able to reach her or her wife, Jen, since then. The co-worker added that Sarah's phone seemed to be dead and that she'd even checked the hospital, but there was no record of her there. The dispatcher asked for more details, but the co-worker could only say that they were worried because it was unusual for Sarah to go off the radar like this. She also mentioned that Sarah and Jennifer lived with their 6 children. That same afternoon, a German tourist reported seeing a GMC Yukon lying on its roof at the bottom of a 100-foot cliff. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the bodies of Jennifer and Sarah Hart inside the vehicle. The bodies of Marcus, Abigail, and Jeremiah were discovered a few hundred yards from the wreckage, all of them dead. 2 weeks later, Sarah's body was found washed up on a beach north of the cliff, and a foot, still inside a shoe, washed ashore shortly after. A DNA test confirmed that it belonged to Hannah. Devontae's body was never recovered. After analyzing the vehicle's data, the police found that the Yukon had gone from idling to speeding towards the cliff at 20 miles per hour. The analysis strongly suggested that this was an intentional act. It was determined that Jennifer Hart had pulled the GMC Yukon over about 70 feet away from the cliff's edge before flooring the gas pedal, speeding up to 20 miles per hour, and driving off the cliff. The car's onboard screen showed that Jennifer hadn't touched the brakes at any point during the fatal plunge. Toxicology reports revealed that Jennifer had a blood alcohol level above the legal limit, and both Sarah and 2 of the children had high levels of antihistamines in their systems. None of the passengers were wearing seat belts. After examination, the police found a series of disturbing Google searches in Sarah Hart's phone, which included questions about Benadryl, suicide, no-kill shelters, and methods of dying. Among the searches were phrases like, "Can 500 milligrams of Benadryl kill a 120-pound woman? Is death by drowning relatively painless? And how long does it take to die from hypothermia while drowning in a car?" When the police in Washington state searched the Hart residence, they found nothing immediately suspicious, but they did notice that this was not a typical family house. The room shared by all 6 kids had no personal items, and the entire house had only a few board games and library books. One officer noted that he did not get the indication that children lived in the house. Animal control later picked up the animals left on the property, but the fate of the family's dogs remains unknown. This likely explains why Sarah had searched for no-kill shelters before the murder-suicide. The motivations behind the Hart family's devastating decision remain a mystery. Despite the numerous unsettling details, we may never fully understand why they chose to take such a tragic path. Why do you think it took so long for anyone to act on the warning signs? And why do you think Sarah and Jennifer Hart resorted to this? Comment down below.
Easter Sunday in 1975 started off as a normal Easter holiday for the Ruppert family, but soon turned into a nightmare that is now dubbed as the deadliest family massacre in American history. Stay tuned as we uncover how a seemingly harmless man managed to murder 11 members of his family. James Urban Ruppert was born on March 29, 1934, to his mother Charity and father Leonard Ruppert. He, along with his older brother, Leonard Jr., grew up in Hamilton, Ohio. However, their small family was far from normal, as Leonard Sr., who was known to have a violent temper, made his children's childhood traumatic. To make matters worse, Charity picked her favorites when the boys were still young, always favoring her brighter and more confident older child, Leonard, over her younger son. James grew up in a hostile environment and was often told by his mother that she wished he was never born since she wanted a daughter in his place. As expected from a child who grew up without parental affection, this negatively impacted Ruppert's self-confidence, and he grew up to become a loner. His parents' carelessness constantly cost him, including his father's insistence on keeping chickens around their house, causing him to develop an allergy to the feathers. Despite his allergy, his parents showed little to no concern for his well-being as they continued to keep the chickens around. When Rupert turned 12 in 1947, his father became deathly ill and soon died of tuberculosis. However, his days of torment were far from over as his older brother quickly took over their father's role and went out of his way to harass his younger brother. As a result, Rupert's performance in school was severely lacking as compared to his brother. With no friends to offer him any support, Rupert found himself dealing with everything on his own as Charity continued to ignore his existence. The constant bullying at home and school got so bad that at the age of 16, Rupert decided to end things once and for all. He took sheets from his home and tried to hang himself. However, he failed to succeed in his suicidal attempt. This marked an important event in Rupert's life as he stopped making any effort towards improving his life and accepted his fate as the inferior son. This became Rupert's first and only suicide attempt. Not surprisingly, Rupert grew to hate both his brother and mother. By the time he reached college, he stood at 5 feet 6 inches and only weighed 135 pounds. He spent 2 years in college before giving up on it as well, while his brother once again surpassed him and graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. It helped that Leonard Jr. had his mother's full support. His resentment towards his brother grew to a dangerous level when Leonard Jr. married one of Rupert's former girlfriends named Alma, a girl that he never lost feelings for. This would later be cited as a motive for his rampage. Rupert began to feel as if the entire world was against him and resigned himself to an unremarkable life, accepting defeat. He trained to become a draftsman, but remained unemployed for the majority of his life, leaving him with no choice but to continue living with his mother, often borrowing money from her and Leonard Jr., while his brother not only managed to get a job with General Electric, he also bought a house in Fairfield where he lived with Alma and their 8 children, 17-year-old Leonard III, 16-year-old Michael, 15-year-old Thomas, 13-year-old Carol, 12-year-old Anne, 11-years-old David, 9-year-old Teresa, and 4-year-old John. Perhaps because he was so frustrated with his life, Rupert developed an affinity for guns. Among his collection, he had a .357 Magnum, 2 .22 handguns, and a .22 rifle. 2 things became ritual for Rupert: drinking and target practicing. Rupert had turned to drinking to deal with the toxic environment at home, as well as to numb his feelings of inferiority. As he got older and remained unemployed, Charity, tired of his drinking, threatened to evict him unless he paid rent. However, since he had lost all of his money during the stock market crash of 1973 to 1974, Rupert had no way to pay his portion of the rent. Although Charity intended for this threat to motivate him to get his life back on track, she unknowingly pushed him towards his breaking point. As the threat of eviction loomed over his head, Rupert began to approach his breaking point. While purchasing ammunition one day, he inquired about silencers, but did not end up going through with the purchase. On March 29, 1975, Rupert turned 41. On his birthday, he was seen at the Great Miami River in Hamilton shooting cans, and this became pivotal in helping the prosecution build their case against him. It can be argued that he was possibly preparing for one of the deadliest nights in Hamilton, Ohio. That night, Rupert stumbled into a bar called the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge. He met 28-year-old mother of 5, Wanda Bishop, who worked at the cocktail lounge, and confessed that his mother was threatening to evict him if he failed to find a job to pay for his portion of the rent. Charity had told him that if he could afford to pay for his drinks, he could pay her rent as well. Wanda recalled that Rupert insisted that he had to find a way to solve the problem. Rupert stayed in the cocktail lounge until 11 p.m. before leaving, but soon returned and continued drinking until the lounge closed at 2:30 a.m. When Wanda asked him if he had managed to resolve his problem, Rupert replied, "No, not yet." The next morning, Charity, who was not feeling well, called Leonard Jr. and his family for Easter dinner instead of an early lunch at their house, 635 Minor Avenue. Once Leonard Jr. and Alma arrived, their children participated in an Easter egg hunt outside, while Ruppert slept in late, nursing a hangover from the previous night. By the time he got up at 4 p.m., everyone had moved inside to continue the celebration, while Charity prepared sloppy joes for the family, and Alma helped put them together. Ruppert stayed with the family for a short while before returning upstairs to retrieve a .357 Magnum, 222 handguns, and a rifle. He intended to head to a shooting range to spend his day, but as he was leaving, his brother asked him, "How's the Volkswagen?" Ruppert took this as an insult, as Leonard Jr.'s comments reminded him of his own failure to lead a successful life like his brother. Instead of leaving for the shooting range as planned, Ruppert made a split-second decision that not only altered the trajectory of his life forever, but also robbed 11 people of their lives. At 6 p.m., Charity, Leonard, Alma, their son David, and daughters Tessa and Carol, who were in the kitchen, became Ruppert's first victims as he fired off several shots in rapid succession, hitting all of them in the chest, except for his mother, whom he shot in the head as she jumped at him to try and prevent him from killing anyone else. He then moved to the living room where he shot his niece Anne, Leonard III, Michael, and John. After his initial shots, Ruppert went around and shot everyone several more times to make sure that they were dead.
After the initial shooting, and if people were moaning and groaning still, he shot them in the head.
The entire ordeal took less than 5 minutes, with Ruppert only stopping in the middle to reload. All in all, he fired 44 shots, out of which 40 hit the victims. After making sure that everyone was dead, Ruppert sat with his family's dead bodies for 3 hours, contemplating suicide, but decided that since it was a mortal sin, he did not want it to be his last act. After 3 hours, he decided to make a 911 call. He told the 911 dispatcher that there has been a shooting.
As his relatives took their last breaths around him, Ruppert sat on the couch. He waited there for 3 to 4 hours before he called police to tell them someone's been shot.
When officers arrived at the scene a few minutes later, Ruppert greeted them at the front door. At first glance, the officers did not suspect that anything sinister was waiting for them beyond the front door, since Ruppert, with his short stature and thick black-framed glasses, did not fit into the usual description of a murderer. As the officers entered the house, they were in for the shock of a lifetime. One of the responding officers also reported that he had never seen anything like the crime scene before him, and that he had to rush to the side to throw up. There was so much blood on the floors that it had seeped through the wooden floorboards and was dripping into the basement. There was no sign of struggle inside the house except for an overturned trash can, indicating that because the family had not expected this, they did not have enough time to react. As the Hamilton Police Department was made aware of the shocking discovery, they immediately covered the area with police tape as people began to gather around. The small community that had known the Ruppert family as a loving family was taken by surprise at the tragedy, and was even more horrified to find that the helpful and modest man they had known their whole lives was behind the murders. The first body to leave the house was of little John, with his sneaker peeking out of the sheet drawn over him. Dread began to fill everyone as one by one, 11 stretchers were brought out of the house, all carrying the now dead members of the Ruppert family.
The site was in 2 rooms of a modest 2-story Hamilton home where James Ruppert lived with his mother. In 2 rooms, 11 bodies, including Ruppert's mother, Ruppert's brother, his brother's wife, and their 8 children, the oldest 17, the youngest a 4-year-old boy.
Ruppert was arrested on the counts of 11 aggravated homicides. Despite being known as a demure but helpful man, Ruppert remained uncooperative with the officers and refused to answer any of their questions. Investigators struggled to find a motive since the suspect in custody refused to say anything. During the initial questioning, it was made clear by Ruppert that he planned on pleading insanity. The prosecutors believed that Ruppert planned on taking advantage of the $300,000 worth of inheritance left by both his brother and mother in the form of their properties and assets. By pleading guilty, he would serve time at a court-appointed facility before being released and getting hold of the inheritance. This case led to 2 high-profile trials. During the initial trial, Ruppert admitted to killing his family, but pleaded innocent by reason of insanity. Ruppert was represented by Hugh D. Holbrook, who became so dedicated to the case that he even personally funded the hiring of psychiatrists and psychologists from all over the country to testify in favor of Ruppert's insanity plea. 2 psychiatrists who were brought on by his defense team concluded that Ruppert suffered from paranoia and delusions of persecution that were brought on by the beatings he had endured during his early life at the hands of his brother. This is why, they argued, he had been unable to control his actions at the time of the crime. Harvard University psychiatrist Dr. Lester Grinspoon supplied his expert opinion, claiming that if more people were present in the house, Ruppert might have killed them as well, pushing the narrative that Ruppert did not have a solid motive other than insanity.
After the slaughter, James Ruppert changed his clothes and called the cops. He was charged and tried for 11 murders. His attorneys said he killed during a psychotic rage. They said he was insane.
Along those same lines, Doctor, isn't it true that you have no way of telling the court what Mr. Ruppert's ability to rationally discuss the case with his attorneys, to rationally assist in the preparation of a defense would be if he were not under the effect of either a major tranquilizer such as Thorazine or Trilofan at this time? Isn't that right?
I have no specific way of telling that other than to say that during the course of my examination with him, he was able at that time and under that condition with that dosage of medication to rationally confer with me and talk to me about what had happened.
At the same time, the prosecution argued that Ruppert planned to misuse the insanity plea to inherit the $300,000 inheritance.
He murdered his family to collect his brother's $300,000 or so in life insurance. That's what I think. That's what I think the evidence showed, and that's what I believe.
Instead of having his case presented in front of a jury, Ruppert decided to have his case tried in front of 3 judges. However, he was incorrectly told that all 3 of the judges would have to agree unanimously on a decision. 2 out of the 3 judges found Ruppert sane and convicted him on 11 counts of aggravated murder. He was sentenced to serve 11 consecutive life sentences. During 1975, the United States had banned the death penalty, saving Ruppert from being given a death sentence. The 3rd Hamilton County Judge, Fred Kramer, however, found Ruppert insane. Between the years 1977 and 1978, the Supreme Court of Ohio ruled that there had been a mistrial since the judges did not know whether they needed to unanimously agree on a decision or have a majority rule. Ruppert was granted another trial that was determined to be held in Findlay, Ohio, since it was deemed that he could not receive a fair trial in the city of Hamilton. On July 23, 1975, the new trial began, where Ruppert and his defense team once again argued for the insanity plea. However, the prosecution led by John Holcomb brought forward 29 witnesses and presented 200 exhibits in court, successfully building a different line of reasoning. He argued that his inquiry into the silencers, practicing his shooting, and talking about his mother as a problem that needed to be resolved were all pointing towards the fact that this mass murder was a carefully plotted crime, especially given the fact that the shooting had been carried out at a time when the church bells had begun ringing, hence drowning out the noise from the gunshots, preventing anyone from calling the authorities. He went on to say that Ruppert planned on aiming for the insanity plea because that would ensure that he would be sent to the Lima, a state mental hospital where he would eventually be declared sane. This would allow him to easily inherit the $300,000 worth of inheritance left behind by Leonard and Charity, which he would not be able to do if he was convicted of murder. Based on the prosecution's convincing argument, Ruppert was once again sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences. A few years later, in 1982, on appeal, Ruppert was granted another trial, where his defense attorney was able to convince the jury to grant him an insanity plea. Ruppert was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for his brother and mother, but found not guilty for the remaining 9 counts of murder by reason of insanity. The only family member to attend the trial was Alma's mother, Edna Allgaier. She blamed Ruppert for 13 deaths, including her husband, who took his own life 3 years after the incident on Easter Day, as well as a juror who collapsed during the trial and died of a heart attack. When Edna passed away, her headstone proclaimed that she was preceded by 8 grandchildren. At the age of 48, Ruppert was incarcerated by the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus. 13 years later, at the age of 61, Ruppert was granted another parole hearing by the State Parole Board, but was denied release. He was granted 2 more parole hearings, one in 2005 and another one in 2015. During all of these parole hearings, he was denied release. During his last hearing in 2015, the Allen Oakwood Correctional Institutional Parole Board released a statement that indicated that Ruppert was not suitable for release due to his negative institutional conduct, as well as a strong community objection to his release. 7 years later, Ruppert died at the age of 88 of natural causes, having spent 47 years in prison.
A man who shot and killed 11 family members on Easter 1975 has died. James Ruppert died over the weekend at Franklin Medical Center in Columbus at the age of 88. The Hamilton Journal-News says that he died of natural causes.
The Ruppert family was buried in Arlington Memorial Garden in Cincinnati, Ohio. A year after the heinous mass murder, the house was opened up to the public. The Ruppert family's belongings were auctioned off, and the hardwood floors were covered with a carpet in places where bloodstains were harder to remove. The house was rented to a family who was unaware of the house's history. As soon as they found out, they moved out, complaining of hearing strange voices and other unexplained noises. To this day, the house remains occupied. Even today, the Easter Sunday Massacre is remembered as one of the deadliest family massacres in America. A book called The Easter Sunday Massacre, A Prosecutor's Diary, the true story of mass murderer James Ruppert, written by the lead prosecutor John's daughter-in-law, Karen Holcomb, was published with the help of his notes left behind after his death.
Karen Holcomb first became familiar with this case in the 1990s when she was a reporter for the Journal-News. She didn't know at the time that her coverage would lead to her marrying the prosecutor's son and decades later taking her late father-in-law's words and crafting them into a book that details the trauma left behind after this tragedy.
What did you think of the case? Do you think Ruppert was eligible for the insanity plea? Or do you think that this was an elaborate plan that he had come up with after deciding that he was finally done accepting the abuse he had endured his entire life?
What could drive a wealthy father living in a $5 million mansion to commit the unthinkable? Was it the pressure of looming financial ruin, or something even darker hiding beneath the surface? We will be diving into a chilling and tragic story that shocked a community and left many questioning how wealth and status could mask such a deep, underlying despair. This is the story of a man who, faced with the loss of his luxurious lifestyle, made a decision that would end in unimaginable horror. Our love and respect go out to all those who knew and loved the Kamal family. The town of Dover, Massachusetts, is renowned for its wealth and exclusivity. It was in this town that the Kamal family lived in an expansive 21-room mansion, which was equipped with luxurious amenities like an at-home spa and a private movie theater. The head of the family, Rakesh Rick Kamal, held a prestigious position at Harvard University, and his wife, Tina Kamal, was also a graduate of the same esteemed institution. Their daughter, Ariana Kamal, attended the elite Milton Academy, with her college tuition already paid for at Middlebury College in Vermont. From an outsider's perspective, the Kamals were living an ideal life of prosperity and success. However, beneath this perfect exterior, the Kamals were facing significant financial difficulties. difficulties that would eventually lead to a shocking crime that no one could have foreseen. The Kamal family's carefully constructed image of a perfect life shattered on December 28, 2023. Their impending eviction, scheduled for that day, was the catalyst for a horrific tragedy. A typed note found inside the mansion warned anyone entering to contact the police and investigate 3 specific second-floor bedrooms. Each room was marked with a white sheet of paper, concealing a scary discovery. Ariana and Tina were discovered in their bedrooms, victims of gunshot wounds. Kamal, the father, was found dead in the bathtub, having taken his own life with an unregistered Glock pistol after murdering his family. The once carefully maintained Kamal home fell into a grave silence, shattered only by the evidence of a brutal crime. As detectives dug deeper into the Kamal family's life, they found a troubling story. Months before the terrible events, the family had declared bankruptcy. Kamal, the father, had been borrowing large amounts of money from his mother and brother. Just a few days before the murders, Kamal made a suspicious change to Tina's $1,025,000 life insurance policy. Instead of being the primary beneficiary, he changed it so his brother, Minaj Kamal, would receive the money. This change happened only 4 days before the murders. The sudden change in the life insurance policy was a major red flag. It suggested that Kamal might have been planning to kill his family. Ironically, Minaj, who had lent Kamal a lot of money, was the one who found the bodies. This discovery revealed the full extent of the Kamal family's financial problems and deception. Kamal's facade of success had been crumbling for years. Despite claiming to have held a high-ranking position at Harvard, he had actually lost his job at 2019, but he kept this secret from his family. Tina, who claimed to have attended Harvard, had no proof of her education there. These inconsistencies suggest that the Kamal family had been living a life of deception, both to themselves and to others. Kamal's financial difficulties were dire. He was behind on mortgage payments for their mansion and resorted to elaborate lies to delay developers who were owed millions of dollars. He even went so far as to claim that Tina's father had died in India when, in reality, he was still alive. Despite these mounting problems, Kamal continued to portray an image of wealth and prosperity. He and Tina even toured a $6,500,000 home in Tennessee, maintaining the illusion of affluence. Their daughter, Ariana, was likely unaware of the family's dire financial straits. With the foreclosure of their home imminent, Kamal's pressure reached a breaking point. Desperate to maintain the illusion of success, he was overwhelmed by the reality of their impending eviction. On December 23, 2023, Kamal made a peculiar request to his brother, asking for information about his life insurance policy, a request that Minaj found unsettling. Kamal had carefully planned the murders by December 28th, the day the Kamals were scheduled to be evicted from their mansion. He had drafted several suicide notes and carefully staged the tragic events that would unfold. When Minaj arrived at the home, the alarm was blaring, and he was met with the horrifying aftermath of his brother's actions. The discovery of the Kamal family's bodies shocked their affluent neighborhood. The police found out that Kamal was in big trouble with money and saw no way out except to kill his family and himself. Their big house, which used to show how rich they were, became a crime scene that told a different story. The police learned how Kamal had lied to his family about losing his job, and how he was trying to buy a new house even though they couldn't pay for the one they had. It was sad that the Kamals were looking at new houses while they were about to lose their own. After the killings, people started talking about the life insurance money that Kamal had changed before he died. His brother Minaj was now going to get the money instead. Tina's brother didn't think this was right, and said that Kamal had tricked Tina into signing the papers. There was a big fight between the two families over the money. Till now, people still wonder if Tina really wanted to give the money to her brother, and if she was forced to sign the papers. Family massacres, often referred to as familicides, are profoundly unsettling and tragic events that involve the killing of multiple family members by one of their own, usually a parent. The act of taking the lives of loved ones, particularly within the intimate and supposedly safe confines of a family, strikes at the very heart of human values and the fundamental notion of kinship. The sheer horror of such incidents compels society to seek explanations to understand the psychological and social factors that could drive someone to commit such a heinous crime. Despite extensive research, the reasons behind these acts remain complex and rooted in a web of psychological, social, and cultural influences. Psychologically, individuals who commit familicide often exhibit signs of severe mental distress. Depression, particularly when it leads to feelings of hopelessness and despair, is a common thread in many cases. For some perpetrators, the burden of providing for their family or maintaining their role as a protector becomes overwhelming, especially when faced with financial ruin, legal issues, or other significant life challenges. Individuals who commit familicide typically suffer from severe mental health conditions that distort their thinking and perceptions. These conditions may include depression, anxiety, psychosis, or personality disorders. For instance, a person experiencing major depressive disorder may develop a sense of hopelessness so profound that they believe there is no escape from their circumstances, leading them to view death as the only solution for themselves and their family. Psychological distress can be exacerbated by other factors, such as substance abuse, which impairs judgment and heightens aggression. Some individuals may also have a history of trauma, unresolved grief, or chronic stress that erodes their coping mechanisms over time. As psychological pressure mounts, these individuals may experience a break from reality, leading them to see familicide as a way to regain control or to save their family from perceived suffering. In extreme cases, delusional thinking can convince them that killing their loved ones is an act of mercy or protection. In other instances, the drive behind familicide is rooted in narcissism and a profound need for control. Perpetrators with narcissistic traits often view their family members not as independent beings, but as extensions of themselves. When their control over their family is threatened, perhaps by a spouse's desire for divorce or by the perceived failure of family members to meet their expectations, their response can be one of extreme violence. For these individuals, the murders may be seen as a way to punish those they believe have wronged them, or to reclaim control over a situation that feels out of their grasp. Unlike those driven by depression, narcissistic perpetrators are less likely to take their own lives after the act, as their primary motivation is to assert dominance rather than to escape despair. In more severe cases, familicide can be the result of psychosis or delusional beliefs. Individuals suffering from conditions such as paranoid schizophrenia may become convinced that their family members are a threat or are in danger from some external force. These delusions can be so compelling that the perpetrator believes they are acting in the best interests of their family or themselves by carrying out the murders. The usual moral and ethical considerations that would prevent someone from harming their loved ones are overridden by the overwhelming power of their delusional thinking, leading to acts of violence that are incomprehensible to those not suffering from such a disorder. Social isolation and alienation are also significant factors in some cases of familicide. When individuals feel cut off from the broader community, whether due to mental illness, cultural differences, or personal circumstances, they may become increasingly withdrawn and paranoid. This isolation can amplify feelings of resentment, anger, and despair, distorting their perception of reality. In such situations, the family unit may become the only focus of the individual's life. And when these relationships begin to deteriorate through divorce, infidelity, or other issues, their sense of identity and purpose may collapse. This collapse can lead to violent behavior as the individual desperately tries to regain control or exact revenge. The psychological underpinnings of familicide do not operate in a vacuum. External factors often exacerbate them. Economic stress, for example, is a frequent trigger. Financial difficulties, such as job loss, mounting debt, or foreclosure, can create intense pressure within a family. This stress can be particularly overwhelming for individuals who tie their sense of identity and self-worth to their financial success or ability to provide for their family. When faced with economic hardship, some individuals may perceive themselves as failures, leading to feelings of shame, guilt, and despair. For many, the inability to maintain their family's standard of living can result in a profound sense of hopelessness. They may begin to see no way out of their financial problems and might irrationally believe that taking their own life, and the lives of their loved ones, is the only way to avoid further suffering. This is especially true in situations where the family's economic decline is sudden and drastic, leaving little time for adjustment or support. The stress of economic hardship can also exacerbate existing mental health issues or trigger new ones. For instance, a previously stable person may develop depression or anxiety due to financial pressures, increasing the risk of extreme actions. In some cases, economic stress can lead to an escalation of domestic violence, as the perpetrator attempts to regain control in the only way they know how: through violence. For some, the perceived failure to provide may lead them to conclude that the only solution is to end their family's lives and their own to escape the unbearable burden of failure. Relationship breakdowns, such as divorce, separation, or infidelity, are also common catalysts for familicide. The end of a marriage or a romantic relationship can trigger intense emotional responses, especially in individuals already grappling with psychological issues. For some, the dissolution of a relationship is perceived not just as a personal failure, but as an existential threat, leading to a distorted belief that their family would be better off dead than living in a fractured home. In other cases, the act of murder may be driven by a desire for revenge against a spouse, perceived as betraying or abandoning the perpetrator, further illustrating the destructive potential of intense emotional turmoil. Cultural and societal influences also play a role in familicide, though these factors are often more subtle and pervasive. In some cultures, there is a strong emphasis on family honor and reputation. When an individual believes that their family has been dishonored, either by external forces or the actions of family members, they may feel compelled to commit acts of violence to restore that honor. Moreover, societal attitudes toward mental illness, masculinity, and family roles can significantly influence an individual's behavior. In societies where mental illness is stigmatized, individuals may be less likely to seek help, even when they are in crisis, leading to a deterioration in their mental state that increases the likelihood of violent behavior. Similarly, societal expectations of masculinity, particularly the role of the father as protector and provider, can create intense pressure on men, potentially leading them to commit familicide when they feel they can no longer fulfill these roles. The availability of weapons, particularly firearms, is another significant factor in many cases of familicide. The presence of a gun in the home can turn a moment of rage or despair into a deadly encounter. Research has shown that access to firearms increases the likelihood of homicide and suicide, a risk that is particularly pronounced in domestic settings. In societies where gun ownership is common and culturally accepted, the risk of familicide may be higher, as the presence of a firearm can make it easier for an individual to act on impulse, turning a momentary lapse in judgment into a permanent tragedy. Preventing family violence requires a complex approach that addresses the root causes and intervenes at critical junctures. Family violence often arises from a combination of psychological, social, and economic pressures, and preventing it involves strategies that target these factors comprehensively. Understanding the psychology behind such acts, strengthening social support systems, improving financial stability, and enhancing early intervention mechanisms are all critical components of a prevention strategy. One of the primary strategies for preventing familicide is to address the mental health issues that often underlie these acts. Many individuals who commit familicide suffer from severe mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, or personality disorders, which can lead to distorted thinking and a sense of hopelessness. Mental health services must be readily accessible and destigmatized, allowing individuals in crisis to seek help without fear of judgment or repercussions. Public health campaigns should promote mental health awareness, encouraging people to recognize the signs of severe psychological distress in themselves and others. By fostering an environment where mental health is openly discussed and supported, society can reduce the risk of individuals reaching a breaking point where they might consider such extreme actions. Social isolation is another vital risk factor for familicide. Individuals who are isolated from their communities and support networks are more likely to feel disconnected, hopeless, and overwhelmed by their circumstances. Preventing familicide requires building strong, supportive communities where individuals feel connected and valued. Community organizations, religious groups, and social services should work together to create networks of support that can identify and assist individuals and families in crisis. Encouraging community engagement and fostering a sense of belonging can help mitigate the feelings of isolation and despair that often precede familicide. Domestic violence is a significant precursor to familicide, particularly in cases where the perpetrator has a history of controlling or abusive behavior. Preventing familicide requires addressing domestic violence at its root through education, intervention, and support for survivors. Public awareness campaigns should emphasize the warning signs of domestic violence and the importance of seeking help early. Law enforcement and social services must be equipped to respond effectively to reports of domestic violence, providing protection and resources to those at risk. Additionally, it is essential to hold perpetrators of domestic violence accountable, ensuring that they receive appropriate legal consequences and treatment for their behavior. By intervening early in cases of domestic violence, society can prevent the escalation to more extreme forms of violence, such as familicide. Another critical strategy for preventing familicide is to promote healthy family dynamics and communication. Families that struggle with unresolved conflicts, poor communication, or dysfunctional relationships are more vulnerable to extreme outcomes. Programs that teach conflict resolution, communication skills, and emotional intelligence can help families navigate challenges more effectively, reducing the risk of violence. Parenting programs in particular can provide valuable support to parents who may be struggling with stress, anger, or other emotions that can contribute to family conflict. By fostering healthy family relationships, society can create an environment where family suicide is less likely to occur. Early intervention is essential in preventing familicide, mainly when warning signs are present. Individuals who are at risk of committing familicide often exhibit certain behaviors or attitudes, such as expressing feelings of hopelessness, making threats, or displaying extreme anger. It is essential for family members, friends, and professionals to be vigilant in recognizing these warning signs and to take them seriously. Interventions such as counseling, mental health treatment, or legal action may be necessary to prevent a situation from escalating to violence. Training for professionals who work with families, such as teachers, social workers, and healthcare providers, can help them identify and respond to potential risks before they result in tragedy. Law enforcement also plays a critical role in preventing familicide, mainly when there are explicit threats or a history of violence. Police officers must be trained to recognize the signs of potential familicide and to intervene effectively. This may involve restraining orders, mandatory counseling, or other legal measures to protect those at risk. Additionally, law enforcement agencies should work closely with mental health professionals and social services to ensure a coordinated response to individuals who may be at risk of committing familicide. By taking threats seriously and acting decisively, law enforcement can prevent potential tragedies. In some cases, the media can contribute to the risk of familicide by sensationalizing similar events or by creating a narrative that normalizes extreme actions as a response to stress or failure. Media coverage should be handled with care, avoiding the glorification of perpetrators and instead focusing on the impact of the crime on victims and communities. Responsible reporting can help prevent copycat incidents by not providing potential perpetrators with a blueprint for violence. Additionally, the media can play a positive role in prevention by raising awareness of the resources available for individuals in crisis and by highlighting stories of resilience and recovery. Ultimately, preventing familicide requires a holistic approach that addresses the complex interactions between psychological, social, and economic factors. It is not enough to focus on any one aspect in isolation. Instead, society must take a comprehensive approach that integrates mental health support, economic stability, social connection, domestic violence, prevention, healthy family dynamics, early intervention, law enforcement action, and responsible media coverage. By addressing these factors in tandem, society can reduce the likelihood that individuals will resort to such extreme actions and can protect vulnerable families from tragedy. Prevention also involves ongoing research and data collection to understand better the causes and risk factors associated with familicide. Researchers must continue to study the phenomenon, analyzing patterns and identifying effective interventions. This research can inform public policy, guiding the development of programs and services that address the needs of at-risk individuals and families. By continually refining our understanding of familicide and its prevention, society can adapt its strategies to meet emerging challenges and protect families from harm. Prevention efforts should also focus on building resilience within individuals and communities. Resilience is the ability to cope with and recover from adversity, and it can be a critical factor in preventing familicide. Programs that promote resilience teach individuals how to manage stress, seek help when needed, and maintain a positive outlook, even in difficult circumstances. Building resilience within families and communities can help mitigate the factors that contribute to familicide, creating a buffer against the pressures that can lead to violence. Resilience-building programs should be integrated into schools, workplaces, and community organizations, ensuring that individuals have the skills and resources they need to cope with challenges in healthy ways. Also, addressing societal norms and attitudes that contribute to familicide is essential. In some cases, cultural beliefs about masculinity, power, and control can exacerbate the risk of familicide, particularly in patriarchal societies where men may feel entitled to dominate their families. Public education campaigns should challenge these harmful norms, promoting values of equality, respect, and nonviolence. By shifting cultural attitudes away from dominance and control, society can create an environment where familicide is less likely to occur. Do you think it was only because of his financial state that Kamal killed himself and his family? Or is there more to the murder than we all know? Kindly consider liking the video, hitting that subscribe button, and the notification bell. See you in the next video.